All right, everybody. Hello, hello. My name is Albert. Welcome to mock interview number 107 here on Albert's List. It's Thursday, September 12th. Hope you are well wherever you are as we enjoy these last few gasps of summer. Mock interview 107. We are here today with Chris. Chris is an IT consultant and a new graduate from college. So, for those of you who have just graduated from school and are now in this crazy topsy-turvy job market, this mock interview is for you. With us, as always, is Cory of Career Shakers. He's here to ask the questions, of which Chris will answer, and then Cory will give feedback. For those of you who are in the attendee section and watching this live, feel free to share any questions that you may have that you would want Chris to answer, or if you want interview insight. Without further ado, Cory, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Appreciate it. Of course, we're always taking volunteers. And for those of you who are watching it for the first time, I always love to give a huge shout out to our brave volunteers. In this case, it's Chris for putting himself out there for practice, learning, and entertainment purposes. And of course, if you are brave enough to volunteer, we always give you a platform to kind of talk to the audience about your background, talk about the roles that you're interested in, and if anyone in the community is impressed by Chris's background, you can always reach out. Or if you have leads for him, please do connect him with potential companies or referrals. So, Chris, I'll kick it over to you. If you want to give the audience like a non-interview answer, like a introduction about yourself.
For sure. Really quick. Can you hear me? My video seems to be frozen, and I want to make sure that at least my voice is coming through.
It does look frozen, but I can hear you perfectly clear.
Okay. Well, then let's hope the video comes back, and I'll just give my non-interview spiel about myself. Hi, everybody. My name's Chris. I just graduated from college, and I'm in the wonderful world of searching for a job. I recently had an internship in Japan, and am hoping I can leverage that to, advance my career. I had the option of like staying in Japan or coming back to the States, and I decided that really for personal economic financial reasons, the States is the best place to have a career at the moment. Yeah, I like to play piano and cook and rock climb, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and we'll see how it goes.
Cool.
I'm definitely feeling on the bleh side of the pole myself, so excited to improve my skills.
And so today we're going to be practicing a management consulting, IT consulting job description for a company called, where did it go? Cambridge Technology Partners. So are you only looking for consulting roles, or are you open to other types of roles? What are you interested in so the community can see if they can find roles for you, Chris?
For sure. I would certainly be interested in consulting roles. Another sort of job title rabbit hole that I've been throwing myself down recently has been analyst, financial analyst, systems analyst, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have coursework that should help support pursuit of that sort of role, and it sets me up to go down a career path that I find exciting. Yeah, that's primarily what I'm looking for. Mostly that sort of analytical, wide-ranging role, similar to consulting.
Okay, cool. All right. Now, I guess before we get started, let's see if we can get Chris's camera to work. If you try turn it on and turn it back up. There we go. Perfect.
Hey, all right.
Nailed it. All right. Now, of course, if you come dressed up in a suit, you get bonus points. So for those of you who are doing this in the future, it's always really impressive. It makes you look really good on camera. And so how it's going to work is I'm going to pretend to be an interviewer. I did used to do consulting. I worked for one of the big four. So this is giving me nostalgia as to some of the interview questions I had to go through when I finished school. So we'll be going through some of those styles of questions today. And how we typically do it is I'll pretend to be an interviewer. So I'll ask a question, and I usually don't give hints unless you get totally stuck, because that way
Okay.
we can treat it like a real interview. And then after the end of each question, I'll give some feedback, and then that way the audience can learn as well, so they can practice on their own. And then we'll go on to the next question. So I've got some questions I drafted up, but if you in the audience have questions for me or for Chris that you want us to practice, use the chat function, and I'll be sure to use your questions. Cool. Ready to get started?
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
Okay. So, Chris, why do you want to work here?
Cambridge Consulting, Cambridge Tech Partners rather, is really exciting for me because I have spent a large part of my academic career and this early part of my professional career with a focus on Japan. I've spent a lot of years studying the language and the culture, and the opportunity to really integrate all of that work into my career is super exciting. Past that, my experience in undergrad working for an augmented reality development company, as well as the AI company that I recently worked for. They are both in the emerging technology sphere, which I think will meld very well with Cambridge Tech Partners' sort of solutions-based technological consulting practice. The field of business consulting is really exciting to me because I am someone who really enjoys having, novel things, novel problems thrown at me all the time. So the environment that I see Cambridge Tech Partners cultivating, having a business model based around giving companies tools to create solutions for themselves is exciting because I don't foresee myself having to babysit a company, but instead moving from company to company, tackling new problems all of the time. That's primarily why I'm really excited to be working or to be interviewing for Cambridge Tech Partners.
Okay, good. So this is like a research style question, right? Where they're looking to see, number one, are you excited to work here? So your tone of voice and your energy level is going to be really important, probably just as important as the words that you say. It's not as true for other interview questions, but this is one of them, right? If they ask you, why do you want to work here? Like, you should be
Yeah.
lighting up just like Chris. I made that mistake when I interviewed for one of the consulting firms. I did not want to work there. And so I gave a good answer, but my energy level was very low. I did not get an offer to go and work there. So I think energy level and excitement is very good for this question. Also, they want to know that you've done some research about the company. So knowing what they do, who their clients are, what kind of consulting they do. There are different consulting firms. Each of them kind of specializes in something else. And so this is known as like an IT consulting company. The job description lists that they do a lot of system implementations, and things like that. So if you're able to talk about like either systems or having like program management, project management exposure, experience, or internships or projects, that's also going to help pitch it as well. Now, this role is a little interesting because the company's headquartered out of Japan. And so one of the requirements is that you have to be bilingual, being able to speak in both English and Japanese in high proficiency. Obviously, I can't test Chris's Japanese today, but there would most likely be an interview question conducted in Japanese to make sure that he could do it. I'm not equipped for that. But so good thing that Chris talked about that he's, worked and studied Japanese. So that makes sure he covers all those different boxes. So yeah, I would say overall, super solid answer from start to finish. And he did talk about his work experience to try to tie it back to the company as best as he could. So yeah, I have no recommendations. I think it was very good.
Sweet. Thank you.
All right. So I saw the question in the chat, very similar to the question that I'm going to ask now, which is, Chris, what makes you qualified to be a management consultant for us?
Yeah. So I have spent a lot of time learning a lot of things. With my double major in my undergrad, I studied world languages and literatures, as well as mathematics, computer science. And it's that breadth of study that I think really prepares me to be a good consultant. My prior experience doing project management at TimeWitch in Japan, as well as my prior experience doing independent development for Shovels and Whiskey in Oregon have both given me a skill set that I think will lend itself well to working with Cambridge Tech partners. Working to help manage a team, do data curation and research on the project that I was assigned to at TimeWitch prepared me to help manage teams when assigned to any projects that Cambridge Tech partners may have. And the independent drive that I had to cultivate while working as a video game developer should show itself well as I tackle research questions for Cambridge. Past that, my work developing my Japanese abilities, as well as my academic coursework through things like databases, micro and macroeconomics, as well as finance, should all come to the fore as I tackle the diverse issues that Cambridge Tech partners have.
Yeah, that was pretty good. So in this particular question, they're going to be looking for transferable skill sets. Obviously, like it's very rare for someone to have consulting experience before they graduate from school, unless you got an internship with one of the consulting programs. So if you don't have it, they are looking for things like project management, program management, or any type of technical domain that's similar to what they'd be working on. So Chris did right off the bat mention that he has done project management as a part of one of his internships, which is perfectly aligned with what they'd be looking for because that's what they're going to be doing, or that's what Chris is going to be doing as a part of his work. And then he's also talked a little bit about his technical expertise and what he's worked on in previous internships. And then, of course, he covered Japanese here again. I think the only piece that's probably missing is like being able to talk about your business, general business acumen, right? Like how you've gotten exposure to understanding different business models, how different businesses work, operating models, your familiarity with like the financial statements, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about like your exposure to some of the advanced functions in like Excel and data analysis. Those are the other like core common consulting skills, right? Oh, and presentations. Some of that stuff you kind of get in school, but some of it like is easier to talk about when you can highlight stuff from your internships. So I think those are the only pieces that are kind of missing, but overall it's a pretty comprehensive answer.
Definitely. I think, yeah, highlighting the sort of computer program proficiencies is a great pointer. Thank you.
Yeah. And then general business acumen is going to be good because I know it's not one of your majors. So
Yeah.
that is going to be a concern of theirs, right? Is like, does
Okay.
Chris understand how businesses actually work?
Totally. All right. That's what I tried to touch on through my financial management course and the micro and macroeconomics, but I guess
That's
going at
different.
it more
That's different.
directly.
Yeah, that's different, right? Like supply versus
Totally.
demand is different than like how a software company works versus like,
Right.
like what is supply chain, right? So, um,
Okay.
and yes, I saw in the chat. We don't always start with "Tell me about yourself." Actually, in a lot of my consulting interviews, the very first question was literally, "Why do you want to work here?" Um, Actually, that was the question I, didn't do very well on because I didn't want to work there. So the order does not matter, folks. They can ask you to you second or third. It doesn't really matter. So just be prepared for that type of question. All right, let's get into some of the technical stuff here. So can you tell me about a project or thing you've done at work or your internship in Excel and some of the advanced functions that you've had to use?
For sure. While working at TimeWitch, I was assigned to go through a list of client IDs, sort of external client IDs and internal client IDs. And I had to use a function to realign all of them and clean the whole data set up and then transfer the data set to a new sheet. I would say that is, yeah.
Okay, so how did you do that?
Unfortunately, right now, it is slipping my mind. I cannot remember the precise function I used. I believe I just created a custom function to get it all to work out using my, CS skills.
Okay, no worries. So, what are some of the advanced functions in general in Excel that you are familiar with?
Sure. I've used flip tables quite a bit to do some analysis, as well as, custom formatting and all that standard sort of thing. That is the extent of my Excel knowledge.
Okay, are you familiar with index match?
No, I'm not.
VLOOKUP?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I would just brush up a little bit on that stuff.
For sure.
PowerPoint presentations and Excel are like the core of what we'll use every day.
Right.
And so being able to talk about like index matches, like it's the advanced version of VLOOKUP. And so if you can talk about index match and if you know how to use it, it really does impress a lot of the folks in the interviews.
Got it.
And then of course, yeah, pivot tables, pivot charts, that's all pretty much bread and butter of the stuff that consultants will be using. And so I would just brush up a little bit on that and make sure that you can talk pretty confidently about what these functions are for, how you use them. And then, of course, if you can talk about how you actually applied that in some of your internships. And if you didn't get much exposure to Excel in the internships, then talk about like some class projects where you've had to use some of these functions,
Totally.
and how you had to slice and dice the data. Some of the more advanced functions, like say you've created like slicers, those are like super, super advanced. But it's not necessary. But like if you really wanted to stand out from an Excel perspective, like there are some really, really advanced stuff that like some of my classmates were able to do that I definitely could not. So
that's good feedback. I know that in pretty much, it's not even in consulting, in almost every single role that I have come across, Excel is one of the top things that they look for. So being able to stand out in the Excel department would be useful pretty much no matter what I'm doing.
Cool. All right. And again, chat, don't be shy. If you guys have questions, we're happy to run through those as well. All right. So can you tell me, what do you think are the elements or components of a high quality client presentation if you were to put one together for one of our clients?
Definitely. I believe that the elements of a high quality client presentation are, readability from the client side. I want to make sure that I remove any technical jargon that might be internal, and make it so that it is very readable. And then I also want to make sure that I'm speaking directly to my audience, that I know how my client wants me to communicate with them. If they're someone who, values the nitty-gritty of the process that we are recommending for them, then including all of those small details in there. If they're a big picture results oriented person, then going through and making sure that those are the things that are highlighted in my presentation. Further, making sure that they are prepared with all of their necessary information to really digest the presentation before the meeting takes place, I think is also key. So preparing my presentation materials well beforehand, forwarding those on to clients before the meeting, and then supplying them with a copy when the meeting begins is another step that I would take to make sure that a client meeting goes smoothly.
What was the first thing you said was important? Was it readability?
Yes. Making sure that I don't have to go through and break down every single, tiny piece of data that might be in the presentation. If I've included charts in the presentation, I don't want to have to pause the meeting to, explain, this is what's on the x-axis, this is what's on the y-axis, this is why I laid it out this way. It should all just be evident at first glance.
Okay, so can you give other examples of readability besides charts?
For sure. I mean, obviously, I don't want to have a massive paragraph of text right up on my presentation. Bullet points are a good way to accomplish that. Just going through and listing off, the top things that are relevant for whatever I'm talking about. And then if they want to have, a deeper dive into that, I can give that to them in the materials for the presentation that I am giving them. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cool. So I think one of the things that Chris did really good that not a lot of people always think about is giving information before the presentation itself. A lot of people just focus on like putting the PowerPoint together as a part of their answer. So it's also good to think outside the box. Now, in terms of the putting the presentation together, yes, readability is definitely one of the things. I would say you probably want to have at least 3 things that you want to focus on when you are putting something together, and then giving some examples. So readability is one. I would say being super concise, right? Like you have to pick and choose what information you should present and what you shouldn't present, because some of it can muddle the story if you present too much information, even if it's in bullet point form, right? Like, because you have a point that you want to make, and then the data that you present should support that point, and then it all should tie very nicely together as like one cohesive story. And then I would probably say like the third thing you can focus on is like the actual, you can call it like the aesthetics of it as well. I cannot tell you how many times I spent up to like 2 in the morning just making sure that like all of the boxes were like straightly aligned to one another and like perfectly centered, and all this other crap that consultants who are, staff level have to go through. So I would say focusing on like three things, and then give some examples as to
Okay.
like why they're important, and then how you would go about ensuring that.
For sure.
Okay. Let's go with, yeah, let's start with Albert's question. Can you tell me about a time when you failed? Yeah, actually, we'll treat this as 2 separate questions. Can you tell me about a time when you failed and what you learned from that?
Definitely. I think a good example of a time when I failed was in one of the classes that I took while studying abroad in Chile. I applied myself to that course, but in the end, I did not get out the grade that I wanted to get out. I viewed it as, a personal failing. That while I passed the course, it's like a C, and that's really not up to my personal standard. I learned from that experience that I need to be careful in how I sustain myself. Um, Practicing, taking care of myself and prioritizing being able to put in a big effort over a longer period of time is something that I learned the importance of through that experience. In the beginning, I dedicated myself really hard to, success in that course, practicing good metacognition around how I was taking notes, developing good study habits. But as the course went on, I began to burn out, and I just ended up not being able to perform as I wanted to perform when it became time for things like midterms and final exams and the big parts of the course that really mattered. So what I learned from that experience was that it sounds funny, but self-care a little bit, as well as prioritization of what is important. The smaller tasks that I was hitting out of the park in the beginning of the course were not as relevant as the big tasks at the end of the course that I was burnt out for. Um, so that concept of self-moderation was a big takeaway from that experience for me.
Okay. Okay. All right. So this is one of those times where answer selection is super important.
Mhm.
And sometimes being too honest is not the best policy for interviews. So in this case, um, you should talk about a failure, but it should be pretty small, something that
Okay.
would not want maybe make the interviewer second guess your candidacy, right?
Right.
Now, I saw your overall GPA; it's very good, but I do think it is risky to talk about getting a bad grade as a failure,
Right.
right? And
I should have
also,
mentioned that the course was taken in Spanish, which was another aspect of why it was difficult.
right.
But
But
yeah,
also the harder part of it is like you have to be able to talk about what you've learned. And then of course we would want to know how you wouldn't make that mistake again, right? So in this case, like it's hard to have a good lesson, right? It's like I got a bad grade. Like
yeah,
should have studied more.
sure.
Right? It's like cool. So like how do I feel better about, like hiring you as a consultant? Because you're gonna work a
Right.
lot, right? So
Yeah,
like if Chris is saying, well, if we're working a lot, like I'm gonna be taking time off because I need time to take care of myself. Right.
totally.
So
And
that
see how
also
that's
doesn't
not.
quite that doesn't quite
Yeah.
work for consulting, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like so I would say let's try something else, like a smaller failure.
Okay. Excuse my pauses. I'm taking notes on this as we go, and so I don't
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to have
Yeah, no
I don't
worries.
want
No
to
worries. Yeah, this is all
get
this is all
technical.
practice. So
Yeah, a smaller failure. Hmm. Uh, During university, I was on the varsity crew team. I was an NCAA athlete. And balancing my balancing my responsibilities as an NCAA athlete and my responsibilities as a student eventually caused this failure to come up. We were having a test of how fast we could row 2 kilometers. And the night um, before that test, I stayed up too late studying. Um, I had an exam coming up and I was really worried about it. So I decided that it was a good time to stay up till 1 a.m. because I didn't have too much coming up the next day except for that 2K test. I did not, I underestimated how badly the late night would affect me prior to this big assignment. And so when I got to the 2K test, I ended up rowing 10 seconds slower than I thought I would, which is a pretty big failure in that sphere. So what I learned from that experience was making sure that I am conscious of what I have on deck for the next day when I am working hard, being conscious of how I allocate my time and prioritizing assignments for the next day. That felt like a weak answer, to be honest with you.
that one is tricky because it's super relevant to being a consultant,
Okay.
right? Like, well, I guess in general, for any job, right?
Yeah.
Because basically you're saying I'm not good at prioritizing things,
Right. I was trying to say that I learned to be better at prioritizing
right?
things through this failure,
Right.
but
But you still, yeah. I mean, it's a tricky one because you're
yeah.
basically saying like yeah. So it's like trust me, I'm better now,
Right.
right? Uh, which is always kind of
Totally.
hard. How could we spin this one? We could say that maybe the lesson wasn't that like you didn't prioritize it appropriately. It was more about
What can you give me an example of what you think the perfect little failure would be?
like you could talk about how you needed to like turn in like a small assignment or something, or there was a group project and how, maybe there was a miscommunication about something and that led you to, turn in, the part of your project, late or under quality than what
Okay.
was expected. But, you've learned how to better communicate certain deliverables or, discuss scope of work or whatever, right? Like something
Gotcha.
small
Yeah,
that
yeah.
isn't super relevant to being a consultant, right?
Got it.
Or like, maybe in one of your coding classes, how like, you know, you weren't able to program something the appropriate way, and you had to make a revision, or you had to go get some assistance or guidance, or I don't know, right? Like something
Absolutely.
either irrelevant or something like
Right.
relatively small that has like a good lesson from it, but like nothing that's like alarming for me as a hiring manager.
Totally.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will do some personal brainstorming on that question because
Yeah,
yeah,
or
I can
like
see
as
my
Crystal
answers were
said,
not.
right? Like maybe in one of the internships there was something you didn't get right at first, and then like you
Yeah,
figured it out as you got guidance or someone had to teach you how it's different than in class, right? Like how if you learn something conceptually in a textbook versus like having to do it at a job, right? Like the application of certain concepts can be different, right? So like that could have been a failure, um, but it's not like entirely Chris's fault. It's just like, oh, he didn't know how to program something, or he didn't know how this tool works, or something, right?
totally. Okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
All right. Let's do one of my questions, and then we'll go back to the one in the chat.
For sure.
Okay. So, Chris, imagine we hired you here as one of our consultants, right? And then we have a client, and they've hired us to figure out why their gross margin is declining each year. How would you help this client solve this problem?
Definitely. So I would work with the client closely to get an accurate breakdown of their business, and start working with their subordinates as well to try and get a clear picture of everything that's happening with the company. Analyze if there are external factors that have been affecting this slowdown in their productivity or their profitability. And then I would try and analyze those sort of problem points, right? Is it an external thing that is happening? Is it a internal inefficiency that is sprouted up? Um, I would try and work to the root of the problem and then begin to solve it from there. Um, Identifying whether it is internal, whether it's external, and yeah.
How would you determine if something is internal versus external? And wouldn't this be something the company would have also already been able to figure out?
For sure. Um, I would go through the company's expenditures, making sure that there was nothing, out of line, looking for any discrepancies, any large changes that had been going on, um, overstaffing, understaffing, just visible inefficiencies. And then that is how I would go about determining whether it was internal. If it was external, I would go about researching other companies that fill a similar role to them in the market, and see if they are having similar problems. If there was some shift that made it so that their business was less profitable. Um, and if not there, then I would switch to researching the alternatives. If I can't find something external, then I will start to look internally. Yeah. As to why they might not know before hiring us, I'm not sure. Sometimes, internal biases can strike anybody. It's hard to see the finish line when you're in the middle of the race. Looking beyond your own circumstances, viewing yourself objectively can be difficult. And so um, providing that fresh set of eyes, I think why we would be hired in that situation.
Okay. So obviously, for a lot of the consulting companies, you're going to have a lot of case study questions, kind of like
Yeah.
the how many bowling balls fit inside of an airplane, and
Right.
how many windows are in Manhattan, and whatever. So
Sure.
this one is a form of that, and so the prompt is if a company's gross margin is going down, what would potentially be some of the reasons as to how you could solve that? So first, you actually need to understand how gross margin is calculated, right? So that's revenue minus cost of goods sold. So in this case, because I didn't tell you what kind of company it was, you should make it as simple as possible. So you should choose you should probably choose like a standard like brick and mortar style business that has pretty predictable costs and overhead. So you shouldn't choose something like software. Software companies are actually very difficult to calculate cost of goods sold because it's mostly labor plus the software piece, which is hard to define. But if you're using like a traditional brick and mortar business, it's literally just like cost of labor, which is like their employees, their hourly wage, minus cost of goods sold, which is the materials required in order to actually build your product, plus labor to assemble, and then shipping, right? And then that would be cost of goods sold, and then you would subtract that from revenue overall. So this is where like having that general like finance 101, business 101 stuff comes into play. And then of course there's like marketing costs and stuff like that, right? So first breaking down to your interviewer, like you understand what gross margin is and then how it's calculated. Then from there, those are your areas in which you would help do some investigation for that company, right? So you should be looking at revenue year over year. So you'd be looking at, for example, over the last 3 years, has revenue been staying the same? Has it been going up? Has it been going down? And then you should walk me through certain scenarios, right? Okay, if the revenue has actually been increasing year over year, but the gross margin is still decreasing, how could that possibly be possible? Like, how could that be possible, right? That would actually mean that therefore the cost of goods sold is increasing at a higher rate than the revenue is, right? And then vice versa. So if the revenue is going down, then we actually have either a sales, marketing, or product problem, right? So that gives you like those three options, and then that leads you to certain recommendations. But if the revenue is going cost problem, right? So then now you need to dive deeper into those different cost elements, right?
Sure.
And then internal versus external factors as it relates to cost, right? And then that external part is actually what would make you different than other candidates, because everyone's going to be focusing on the math itself, which is all internal. But then if you also mention the external piece, then that could also be a factor that which is somewhat out of their control, but also sometimes in their control as to how you react to external factors that could impact either cost or revenue. Okay. Right? Like revenue could also have gone down because of external factors, right? Maybe there's like a law that passes that negatively impacts the sales of your goods, or this is the election year, right? So certain industries tend to do better during election years, and some industries tend to do worse, right? So there's all those different types of factors that you can try to calculate and then factor in. The thing you want to balance is like making sure your answer is not overly long. You kind of want to strike that like 5 to 7 minute range. So not choosing too many different variables, therefore you don't have a super, super long answer, but also being comprehensive enough to walk them through how you would actually advise this client, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and these are one of the tougher questions. So there's a really good book called Case in Point. All the consultants read it, buy it, study it before all the interviews. It walks you through the different types of consulting questions that you'll get, case study questions that you'll get, and then kind of how to break them down into smaller problems, and then how you solve those smaller problems from there. So
cool. I will look up the book for sure. And that's helpful. I was not sure. Yeah, I really wasn't sure how long the answer was supposed to be. And breaking it down like that makes a lot of sense. So very useful for future.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with another audience submitted question, which is, can you tell me what is your greatest weakness and your greatest strength?
I would say that my greatest strength would probably be my perseverance and tenacity. I have taken a lot of independent action to keep myself moving on a trajectory that I believe is positive in life. When I was uh, having trouble in the postgraduate job search, going to alternative job fairs, things that would be scarier out of left field for most people. By doing that, I managed to find an internship in Tokyo, Japan. So that willingness to keep doggedly after what I want, I believe, is a very big strength of mine. I think my biggest weakness is maybe an effect is caused by that strength, which is that I often get too invested in things, go too far with things. When I was 18, I discovered that I loved yoga, and I did yoga for 2 hours every day, right from the get-go. And I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And then I accidentally stretched my shoulders too far and ended up injuring myself. A similar thing happened when I realized that I loved playing piano. I played until I gave myself carpal tunnel a year later. So managing that eagerness, that drive is something that I have struggled with. And I would say that it is my biggest weakness.
Okay. All right. Uh, so in terms of the format of how you answer this, Chris did it perfectly, which is you talk about your strength and their weakness, and then you want to give an example that demonstrates that. And then on the weakness part, you do the same thing, state the weakness, give an example, and then you have to talk about how you're either working to improve it and or it's no longer a weakness. Um, that's the general format you want to follow. Now, the hard part for this question is choosing what to talk about. So when you are choosing a strength, it should be something that's super relevant for the role. Ideally, the more technical you can choose of a strength, the better. Um,
Okay.
because they're going to be thinking, okay, how does this help me, right? So, for
Right.
example, perseverance, right? How does this help me as a
Too general.
consultant
Should be
if
more like,
someone has perseverance, right? And the practicality of things, not super helpful, right?
so that I'm a people person and a natural leader. Um, I can make connections with people very easily, and have found that, making genuine connections with people is not just a strength for me, but a real passion as well.
Right.
I
And then
know
the
that
hard
that's
part,
not technical, but it is.
for this one is giving a example that demonstrates this, right?
Yeah. Um, should I give one?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Sorry. When I joined, one of the internships I did in my undergrad was as an English language assistant at the Osaka Gakuin Daigaku International Chat Lounge. I was able to really easily make deep connections with the students I was assigned to be helping. I made sure that the connections I made with those students were strong enough that they would come back and see me. And after a while, the amount of students who came into the lounge actually began to pick up. Um, then I was able to translate that into having big, really popular lounge events. So we organized field trips and I led workshops teaching Spanish to the Japanese students there. Um, it was a super positive experience, and making those deep connections with people was really valuable to me.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's a good one. And then for um, the weakness is that so the hard part with the weakness one, right, is you have to be able to show that it's no longer a weakness. So choosing a weakness that is like, I get really passionate about stuff. It's not technically a weakness, right? That you're really passionate about stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's also hard to say that, like, or show that it's no longer a weakness, right? You're like, but now I don't do yoga for 2 hours a day, right? It's
Right.
like, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. um, yeah. So for this one, I think it's easier to pick something that has like a small story with it. It's kind of like the mistake story
Yeah.
in a way, right? And then actually, like yeah, for this one, you could talk about how, like, you know, if you did past tense, right, you could be like, you know, my sophomore year, I had a really hard
Mhm.
time prioritizing being a Division 1 athlete and maintaining my studies. Then you give them that story about, you know, how you were 10 seconds slow on your race.
Yeah.
And that one's actually good because you prioritize school in that particular example, right? And then what suffered the uh, was the sport. Whereas if you had done it in the other way, right, you were like, I totally crushed it in the morning, but then I got a D, right? Like that would be way worse from an interview
Yeah.
perspective.
Totally.
So I think that one's actually fine. And then you can talk about how you've learned to better reprioritize or find that balance, or like, yeah, reprioritize and optimize and like become more efficient at like what it takes to, I guess, learn and
Yeah.
achieve results or something like that, right? And then you can talk about how you've like created a new study system for yourself, or you know, you've developed a
Gotcha.
different framework for how you can, I don't know, master concepts faster that allows you to balance both, right, in the same time frame. I don't know, right? But
Okay.
that would be really impressive, right? If I'd be like, oh wow, like Chris was able to like create this framework for himself or do something where I'm like, oh okay, yeah, that makes
Okay,
sense.
cool. Yeah, no, that's super actionable.
All right, and then well, yeah, well, let's wrap up with let's go with Albert's question. How do I know you won't get bored in this job?
I am someone who likes to pursue things deeply. I think that, a surface level understanding is really interesting and great. But really developing expertise in something is something I value very much. I am fully capable of being a deeply detail-oriented person and focusing on the minutia of a thing. During my time in undergrad, I played as a concert pianist, and I had a piece that I practiced for over 400 hours, 10 minutes of music that I practiced for over 400 hours. Um, I didn't get bored of it. I was able to find new aspects of it that were enthralling and inspired me to keep honing my craft. And, I eventually played it. I will bring the same dedication to my work here with Cambridge. I am fully prepared to, spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on a case if necessary, to dive into the deep details of anything that you give to me. Yeah, I really look forward, in fact, to developing expertise with you at Cambridge.
Yeah, and then I think the only thing to add to that would just be like, that's why I'm so excited about being a management consultant, because this is one of
Totally.
those particular
Okay.
fields where you actually get encouraged and rewarded for becoming a particular expert in one specific area. And I
Right.
love learning, and then you give them, you know, that example, and then it
Yeah.
shows that like this is literally the perfect job for you, right?
Right.
So Chris's example here is actually perfect, because it ties perfectly to the nature of the role, and then that would actually make him a better candidate. Awesome. All right. Well, let's give Chris a huge round of applause. I think he's our first consulting mock interview. So yes, huge round of applause. These are super, super tricky. Thank you for giving me PTSD of all the things that I used to do for a living, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank
And
you
yeah,
for
I guess if
being here.
anyone wants additional interviewing tips and tricks, like I'll put my YouTube channel in there and the Albert's List YouTube channel as well.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Cory. Chris, I think it was wonderful to us to experience your multifaceted Renaissance man. I think you'll do very well in interviews, and I look forward to seeing you celebrate your very first job. For those of you
Thank
who
you.
spent some time with us today, thank you so much for doing so. We have many, many more events coming up, including the kickoff of our fall interviewing boot camp that will be led by Cory. So if you enjoyed that, you can get 5 more weeks of him, and you can find that event on our Eventbrite page. In the meantime, our next mock interview will be this coming Monday. So set your calendars for 4 o'clock. The invites will go out shortly, and we will see you all so very soon. Have a great weekend, and thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.